على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. We will now start the discussion on the ninth claim of Imam al Ghazali رحمة الله عليه. الدعوة التاسعة ندعي أن الله سبحانه وتعالى مرئي. We claim that Allah can be visible. خلافا للمعتزلة. This is unlike the Mu'tazila. So this is an interesting discussion here, because previously we said that Allah isn't something physical, He's not made out of bodies, He's not made of atoms, He's unlike the created order. Yet we are claiming that He is visible, He is something which can be seen. But this is a clear break from those that claim that the Ash'ariyah always give priority to reason over logic, not over the revelation. However, we see here clearly that Imam Ghazali, the reason and his motivation for saying this is because of the narrations and the riwayat which say that Allah will be seen. There are a few things to take note of. There are a few principles to keep in mind. One is that Allah is not something which can be created, nor can He be described with anything that implies createdness, nor can He be attributed with anything that contradicts His divine attributes, like knowledge and power. So you cannot say that Allah possesses anything which does not coincide with His attributes. So anything that applies to all existence and does not contradict these truths can be rationally affirmed for Allah. So these are quite important principles here, because what he's saying is that you can affirm something for Allah, rationally speaking, as long as it doesn't contradict the principles which I've just mentioned. So those principles, once again, is Allah cannot be something which has been created. He cannot be described with anything that implies createdness. He can't be attributed with anything that contradicts divine attributes. As long as you say something about Allah and they do not conflict with these things, then rationally it's permissible. Interestingly, in this segment as well, Imam al Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says, أنه سبحانه وتعالى عندنا مرئي لوجوده ووجود. That Allah is visible because of his existence and the existence of His essence. فليس ذلك إلا لذاته. So that is only because of His essence. So it's not because of one of His actions are visible or one of His attributes are visible, but it is His very essence which is visible. So it's one of the purposes of this discussion here also is to reconcile how Imam Ghazali, and I've already discussed this, how he negates that there's a direction for Allah, but there will be a divine vision, because one would think that our sight is limited to a specific direction. So if we can see Allah, then He must be in a direction. But Imam Ghazali is saying, no, this isn't the case. You can still be visible. The ru'ya can still be affirmed without affirming a direction for Allah. So important to know, Allah is visible by essence. It's inherent to existence, and it's not due to His actions or attributes. So visibility is inherent to existence. It's like knowability. Not that He is actually. So we aren't saying that Allah is actually seen right now, but His essence allows for it. In other words, it's not internally impossible for Allah's essence to be viewed or seen. For example, what he's trying to say here is that an essence is such a thing which can be seen. So like water is something which quenches by nature. So it is the nature of an essence that it be visible. So what we're trying to say here is that even if, there's this question about when a tree falls in a forest, and then would it make a sound or not make a sound if no one is there? But we're saying by the nature of physics, it's such that this tree collapsing will create a sound. Similarly, water is something which by nature quenches one's thirst. Even if no one drinks that water can still be described as something that quenches one's thirst. So we are saying Allah can be seen, even if no one is viewing Him or seeing Him at the current moment. His nature is the nature of an essence that enables something to be seen. And there's two angles to discuss this from. The one is it rationally possible? And he will discuss that further as well. And then, of course, it is proven by scripture. So how would we prove rationally that Allah, His essence, can be seen? So God is a real existent thing with an essence, and He has attributes which are unlike created beings. Anything applicable to existence, not implying createdness or contradiction, can apply to Him, technically speaking. Like there's no reason that we cannot say Allah or God has this attribute or this feature if it does not imply createdness or a contradiction. And then now this is the crux of the matter. He explains what he thinks vision is. So he says vision is a kind of knowledge. So knowledge applies to Allah without implying change or flaw. So someone can have knowledge of Allah, and Allah has knowledge also, and none of these things mean or imply a change in Allah or a shortcoming or a flaw within Him. So when we see something, so he's going to expand on this later, but what he's trying to say is when we see something, we gain a type of knowledge of that thing. So if we know of someone, for example, so we have a friend and they just speak of someone and they talk about them a lot, but we've never seen them, but we have information about them, we have knowledge about them. And then when we see them, we say, oh, now I can put a name to that, a face to that name, or a name to the face, or the vice versa. But now, because when we think of that person, we will now associate that name with that face, so we have a clearer knowledge. So according to this theology, having a vision is a type of knowledge. And just because you can have knowledge of Allah, that doesn't mean Allah will change. So someone might say, if Allah is visible, then He must be in a direction. And this implies that He is a body, or He is an attribute or an accident. And this is impossible because you've previously shown that God cannot be a body, because remember we defined body as something which can be divided into an atom and something which inheres in a space. And Imam al Ghazali argued, of course, that Allah cannot be a jawhar, an atom, or He can't be a jism, because they exist in space, and space is something which inherently changes. And because something which changes is indication of a new event, and there was a principle of that all things which are not free of contingencies or new events are themselves a new event. And just a quick reminder, this is obvious with the case of motion. So if a body is in motion, then it's obvious how this body is changing and new events are occurring with this body. And if a body is in rest, then because the possibility of motion exists, then you would say that it is also, even though it is in rest, it is also something which can change. So because the possibility of it changing and occurring as a new event is present, it cannot be something which is eternal. We said Allah is eternal. So therefore, Allah cannot be a body or an atom, and an attribute or an accident here. An accident, we mean by an accident is something which exists within a body, and because a body exists in space, therefore therefore Allah can't be an accident. And an attribute is something that belongs to something else. So of course, Allah, if He's an attribute, what is He an attribute of? Who does He belong to? Who is He possessed by? So that's why it's not possible for God to be to be a body which exists in a direction. And if someone might say, if Allah is visible, then that would imply that He is in a direction. And the response is that it denies that visibility requires direction. Direction isn't a necessary condition for visibility. So just because humans only see with direction, that doesn't make it necessary in all cases. And this is the same flawed logic which is used by anthropomorphists. And there's an analogy that supports this. So for example, God sees Himself and the world without being in a direction. So that's one type of example some people that he uses. And Imam Ghazali, he is asking here as well that, why do you say that something which is visible must be in a direction? Right? Why does this opinion come from? أَعْلِمْتُمْ ذَلِكَ بِالضَّرُورَةِ? Is this known by necessity? أَمْ بِنَظَرٍ? Or is this a speculation? وَلَا سَبِيلَ إِلَى دَعْوَ الضَّرُورَةِ? They use no, you can claim that this is something which is known through necessity. Right? And then if it's known theoretically, فَلَا بُدَّ مِنْ بَيَانِهِ, then you have to explain it. منتهاهم أنهم لم يروا إلى الآن شيئا إلا وكان بجهة من الرأي مخصوصا. So they need a specific position. They need to specify what they mean, or why is it that something can't be viewed. So just because something can't, ومن لم يرى فلا يحكم باستحالته, just because you can't perceive of something doesn't mean that you have to rule it out as impossible, right? I also want to backtrack a bit as well, because I did notice something here that's quite interesting. Imam Ghazali is saying that Allah is he is visible because of His existence. ووجوده ذاته ووجود ذاته فليس ذلك إلا بذاته. So he is saying that His essence is his existence is His essence. So you could here he's reducing his the quality of existing as His essence, and this is further explained later on in where he says هو أن نقول أن البارئ سبحانه موجود وذات. He is existing and an essence. وله ثبوت حقيقة. He is established. وإنما يخالف سائر الموجودات. How is Allah different to all موجودات? Because some people would argue, aren't you likening Allah to creation? If He exists, another thing exists. But here Imam Ghazali is saying He is different to all موجودات, all other existing things, because it's في استحالة كونه حادثا, because it's impossible for Him to be a new event originated, أو موصوفا بما يدل على الحدوث, or described with something which is indicative towards newly created. أو موصوف بصفة تناقض صفات الإلهية من العلم والقدرة وغيرهما, and I've already explained this, and being described with any attribute which contradicts the divine attributes like knowledge and power, etc. فكل ما يصح لموجود فهو يصح في حقه تعالى. So whatever is appropriate for something which is an existent thing, then it's also appropriate for Allah as well. إن لم يدل على الحدوث, as long as it doesn't show or indicate createdness. ولم يناقض صفة من صفاته. ودليل عليه تعلق العلم به, and the evidence for this is because it's possible to have knowledge of Allah. Anyways, returning to Imam al Ghazali's explanation of this contention, where he says if you say Allah can be viewed, seen, then that means he is in a direction. And we said that Allah, he has knowledge. Allah is the all-seeing, so he sees himself and he sees the world without being in a direction, and everyone accepts this. So this is basically using one of their own beliefs to run with an argument. So he's saying, and we said that in the beginning, that sometimes he would use one of their own views and use that against them. So it's like a reduction ad absurdum, sort of. So just because Allah sees himself, that doesn't mean he's in a direction. And humans see, and he uses an interesting discussion argument here. He says a human sees himself in the mirror without being in front of self. He refused the need for a direction. So when I see myself in a mirror, right, it's quite an interesting one. So the mirror example is there's an image appears behind the mirror, but it's not physically actually there. It's quite interesting. I'm not sure how this is translated in modern terms, and if this can be how this might be refuted. But when we look at a mirror, there's an image that appears. I don't know how it works. Maybe some light bends, etc. But that mirror, it looks when we look at the mirror, it looks like our reflection is inside that mirror, behind, obviously not on the glass, but behind the glass somewhere. But it's actually, but physically speaking, there isn't anything there. It's just a reflection of lights. So we can see ourselves in the mirror, even though it's not a specific direction. We aren't in that direction. So this shows that seeing the self in the mirror proves that direction isn't necessary, because we can see ourselves, but we aren't in that direction. And this refutes the Mu'tazila claim with a strong sensory example. And so also what this is trying to show is obviously it's not a one-for-one comparison with how Allah would be viewed, but it's just showing if it can be conceived, and if it's possible to conceive of something being observed without requiring a direction, then it's also possible, and then we can also possibly say that Allah can also be viewed without being in a direction. The second approach, I like this one better. It's he's clarifying the meaning of vision. So the Mu'tazilites, they wrongly assume that vision always means a physical sight of bodies and colors, and they say that form is impossible for Allah, but vision doesn't. But we're saying that vision doesn't require that form, which of bodies and colors. So we have to analyze the meaning of vision. So remove that which doesn't apply to Allah. For example, we say that the eye, which is an organ, is required for vision, and this eye is limited. It's a limited organ, and it's required for vision. So the way that, but then is it necessary to see something? Is it possible to see something without the eye? Can we vision something within our minds without an eye? Yeah, we can vision something. If the remaining, so what he's saying here is, if we can remove the organ, if we can show that the organ isn't necessary to envision something, and a direction isn't necessary to envision something, and then that remaining concept we have will still count as vision, and we can affirm that for Allah. So if it's only metaphorical. But if it's a metaphorical meaning and we can't accept it, then we will just affirm the meaning via the scripture. So he then goes on to break this down and says that the eye is not essential for seeing; it's just a tool, and vision is about the cognitive experience, right? So the cognitive experience is that mental experience that we have, the first person perspective that we have, the mind's eye, as they call it. They even have a word for it now, the mind's eye. We see something. When you see something, the eyeball is just a physical thing. How are we seeing? How are we even seeing things? How is that being translated to our conscious first-person experience? We didn't even know this, because but there is definitely a connection between the eye and the way that it filters our vision. So and the way that we experience vision, but the eye is essentially a tool which is connected with the brain, and this helps our vision. This helps our consciousness experience sight and vision. So the eye itself isn't essential, because when you go blind, you could still have visions of things. You could still see dreams, and you could still see things through your mind's eye. So it's about the cognitive experience, and if that experience happens through the heart or in any other means, it's still considered vision. So sometimes when they use heart, they mean the consciousness. So the divine vision is rationally possible, and it's not dependent on that physical trait. So the vision is not limited to the eye. Perceiving with the heart or brain is also called vision if the awareness is achieved. So the specific quality of what is seen, blackness, color, motion, etc., is not essential for defining vision. So vision's essence lies in being a type of perception that has an object. So the color, the motion, right? If it's black or white, all of these things, they aren't essential for defining what it means to view something. Rather, a vision is something which is a type of perception which has an object. So as long as there's a perception and there's an object, then you could call this vision. So this is Imam Ghazali's explanation of what a vision is. So he is saying this is the primary point. A vision is something where there's a perception, and this perception has an object regardless of the object's nature. So the term vision can apply to higher levels of perception, one that is clearer and more complete than imagination. So when we say so by using this definition of vision, where we say it's a perception that has an object, the word vision can now apply to a higher level of perception. So, for example, when we see a friend and then we imagine him, right? So we might not have seen our friend in a few weeks, or we might have met a person recently, and then we go home thinking, what did he look like again? And we have a rough idea in our mind what he looks like. But when we actually see him, then we gain a more fuller realization than the imagined form. So our vision, by seeing him actually going and seeing him using the vision, our perception of that person becomes clearer. So you say imagination is a level of perception, but vision is something which perfects it. Hence, vision is defined as a perfection of perception. So what we're saying is that vision here means to achieve a more clear and a perfected form of perception. So remember, we said vision can generally be defined as a perception which has an object, but more specifically, it is a higher level of perception where our imagination of a thing is perfected. So our conscious experience of a thing becomes clearer through vision. So we can say that an imagination, of course, is when we imagine something, it's a type of knowledge based on the knowledge that we have, and with our vision, this knowledge becomes clearer. So our knowledge of Allah becomes more perfected. So this can be a meaning and definition of vision. Then he says some things, for example, Allah's essence, His power, and His knowledge are known, but they cannot be imagined, so they are perceived without form. So it's rationally possible for this type of knowledge to be further perfected. So look, for example, here, what he's saying here. We know that Allah exists. We know Allah has power. We know Allah has knowledge. But we don't, we can't, we are known, but, so we know we have knowledge of them, but we aren't able to imagine these things. Remember, previously we also spoke about the essence of love and the essence of knowledge and even the essence of imagination. We have knowledge of these things, but we cannot imagine them. So we can perceive of them without even a form. So we're moving even a step further now. We can perceive of things without even needing a form to be created. We don't even need an image to be created in our minds of a form. So it's rationally possible for this type of knowledge now to be further perfected. So just like vision perfects imagination, we can also say that this awareness and knowledge of Allah's being can be perfected as well. So this perfected awareness can be termed vision, witnessing, seeing, etc., depending on the context. So such clarity of awareness is not impossible, even for things without image or form. So like we said, Allah's essence or Allah's knowledge or Allah's power, we might gain a greater awareness and clarity of this, and this could be called vision. But the heart naturally desires deeper knowledge and clarity of Allah's essence and attributes. When the soul is purified, it can attain this higher level of awareness of divine realities. And this degree of perception surpasses the standard knowledge, as vision surpasses imagination. So we have a standard knowledge of Allah, we know He exists, but through this vision of Allah, our perception of Him would be greater. So using the word vision for this is appropriate if such perception is created in the eye or the heart. So imagine that, because like I said, so in the beginning we said the eye is a tool used to create an image in the mind, a more perfected image than our imagination. So, and we also said that imagination is a type of knowledge, however, we can have knowledge of things without creating an image. So if we were to say that our degree of perception surpasses the standard knowledge using the eye. So if you use the eye then, if Allah created within us the ability to use the eye to gain a greater understanding and depth of His essence and His knowledge, then this could still be called vision, because we are seeing Him using we've broken it right down. We're seeing Allah using our eyes. However, when we say seeing, we're talking about gaining a greater and a more perfected understanding and awareness of Allah. So once the meaning of vision is properly understood, reason supports it and scripture also confirms it. Opposing to it stems from stubbornness, semantic disputes, or the inability to grasp subtle meanings. This is on page 46 of Imam al Ghazali. He said a lot. Obviously, I've broken it down, but there's a lot. He speaks a little bit more deeper as well. He goes more deeper, especially into he likes the example of the mirror. You might find that you might find it convincing or not. So the topic, the vision of the ru'ya, the vision of Allah, the ru'ya. So from its affirmation is in the Sharia through numerous scriptural sources affirm the possibility of seeing Allah, the Prophet ﷺ's supplications, the companions' beliefs, Like there's famous hadith, the Prophet companions asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, will we see Allah on the day of judgment? He says, you'll see. Do you have any, like, doubt in when you see the moon or the full moon or the sun? And they like, no. And then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you'll see him like this. There's a consensus also amongst the early generations. So this shows Imam Ghazali, he thinks that the beliefs that he holds are in line with what was held by the Salaf. So there's this idea that Ash'ari was strongly influenced by the Greek, but he doesn't even talk about the Greek at all. He's talking about how he's influenced by the Salaf. Right? Generations indicate acceptance of this belief. There's evidence from Musa alayhi salam as well. He asked Allah to show him himself. This implies vision is possible because a prophet cannot be ignorant of fundamental divine truths. So why would Musa alayhi salam, who was a prophet of Allah, ask Allah to see him if it wasn't possible? So the denial of vision implies accusing a prophet of ignorance or anthropomorphism, and this is kufr. So reasons to objections. So there's a verse in the Quran which says, you shall not see me. And there's also another, la tudrikul absar, eyes do not perceive him. So you could say this is interpreted as no complete encompassing of Allah, right? So there's no physical perception, right? Or it could be referring to the perception in this dunya. So it's best to have a balance between the extremes. There's the anthropomorphists, the Hashawiyya, they affirm direction, which leads to corporeal implications, and there's the Mu'tazilites on the other extreme who deny direction altogether. So and this obviously contradicts the explicit text. Then you have Ahl Sunnah and the iqtisad or iqtiqad, he will say here, that they deny direction since Allah is not a body, but they affirm the vision as a perfection of knowledge, not physical. So remember, vision does not have to equal physical contact or spatial limitation. So the key theological position, vision of Allah is like knowledge, it doesn't change or affect the object. So when we see something, does this thing change? Some people might say it does because of quantum theory nowadays, but generally speaking, it doesn't, right? So it is the perfection and completion of understanding. This is the economy in belief. This is the al-iqtisad fil i'tiqad, the balanced position of the Sunnis. And then the next claim is about Allah being one, and inshallah we will discuss this next time. That's on page 49.